Hey, folks, welcome back to the Living in the Virtues of Your Strengths podcast. My name is Matt Engel. I'm a certified Catholic mindset coach with Metanoia Catholic, and I'm also a certified Gallup Strengths coach, Strengths Finder coach with Gallup. And today we're going to be exploring the responsibility talent. We've been going through all of the different talents, signature themes, and looking at them not necessarily in just what they are, right? What those habitual ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that can be applied productively are for that talent, but what drives them? What's the motivation behind them? And then how might we live them out virtuously? Virtuously. Okay. So we've seen the strengths that can show up in ways that are viciously, or they can show up virtuously. And then as the mindset coaches from Metanoia Catholic, we're also looking at this. What is the mindset? What are the thoughts that we're thinking that is inclining us to the deployment of these different talent profiles? And so if we can capture those thoughts, right, we can capture some of those thoughts that lead us to go vicious or virtuous, and certainly rinse and repeat those things that are virtuous. So let's jump into the presentation here, because what we do on this podcast is we learn how to not only name, claim, and aim our strengths, but to tame them as well. Okay. So responsibility talent, already said, we're going to be looking at the virtuous and vicious ways that it shows up, the mindsets behind it, and then what drives that responsibility. So let's turn to our baseball card that Gallup gives us to give us a little bit of an overview of this responsibility talent. Okay, so first off, the person that's high in responsibility, they say, I am, what are they being? Someone others often trust to get things done. I will, what are we doing? I will keep promises and follow through on commitments. I bring, what's that contribution? I bring dependability and loyalty. I need, what are the requirements for them to be able to seamlessly and like without a whole lot of friction, step into that place of contribution. I need freedom to take ownership. I love, what do they value? The respect of others. I hate, again, what do I value? I hate disappointing others and being disappointed by others. That metaphor image is serious owner, not disinterested renter. And the barrier label is can't say no or let go, or micromanager. Okay, so maybe I see some smiles on this of people that are high responsibility. Maybe you've heard some of these things before, especially those barrier labels. I know I've heard that micromanager show once or twice. It's number 5 for me. But here's my word picture. Okay, so watching on YouTube, you're going to be able to watch along, listening in. Here's what I've got. Okay, the first image may not make a whole lot of sense. It's a little cartoon going into a coal mine or a gold mine or whatever it is. And why is that in there? Because the person's high responsibility always says, mine, mine, mine. There's a psychological ownership of a task, and once you give it to them, it's mine. It is mine. Don't tell me how to do it. You don't need to check in on me either. It's mine. I haven't forgotten about it. Trust me. I go to bed sleeping. I go to bed thinking about it. I dream about it. And I have it on my checklist. Maybe if you're an achiever as well, it shows up on my checklist and it's on my radar. Don't worry. It may not necessarily be done to your expectations unless you've given me those expectations. Then it will be done by those expectations. But trust me, I have this prioritized in my workday. There is time set aside for it. It is mine. And please don't get in my Cheerios with this. Okay. So the next thing I have is a vice grip, because they say mine and then they hold on to a task with a vice grip. Okay. This can get them into trouble when they are saying mine to things they really should not say mine to. All right. More on that when we get to our virtuous, vicious conversations. I also got an image of a Sidewinder missile. All right. So we know what these are. If you've seen Top Gun or the new Maverick, which is amazing, Sidewinder missile locks in, you fire. It's a fire and forget missile. All right. So shoots, it hits the target, kind of like responsibility. You give something a task or responsibility, you walk away, you come back without supervision, and they've gotten it done for the most part. Okay. I've got an image of a big fat pig with a basketball because he's a ball hog. And that's often how a person high responsibility can seem when it comes to tasks on the team. They just want to say, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll take it. I'll take it. Okay. That was certainly me, I'd say, in my immature days of responsibility, burning the candle at both ends. I've got images of people in a command and control center because responsibility likes that control, likes to hold on to the control of a task, seeing it get done. Also have an image of Old Faithful, the geyser over in Yellowstone, because that thing is like every minute that thing is shooting off. That's why they call it Old Faithful, and it's very dependable. And the person high responsibility is often, like we learned already, highly dependable to get the job done. One of the reasons why we hired Hannah on our team was because we just knew we were going to be working with a remote employee. Hannah was high responsibility, also high discipline. Hannah is like, you've heard us refer to her on the call before. She is that heat-seeking missile. She's that fire and forget missile, and she can get it done on our team. So she's got a specific skill set there. And then finally, we've got the clay, the person's hand needing some clay, some art clay, and their hands are dirty. Person with high responsibility. They're not governing from afar. They're in it. They're involved. They're getting their hands into a project. They're getting their hands dirty on a project. Again, this psychological ownership. It's not just owning the conception of it. It's owning the actual work, the doing of it, the hands-on work of it too. Okay. This is what I got for responsibility. How is this landing with y'all? Okay, let's start seeing some hands. I want to see what could we add to this? Which of these is resonating with you as I'm speaking? Janae, I see your hand come up. Gina, I'd love to hear from you, or number 4 on the team after Janae. Janae, what do you got?
Just real quick, I'm 18 in this, but my husband is number 6, and it just makes so much sense. Like, looking at this, there's so much about even the career that he chose. As we've talked about before, he's an anesthesiologist, and he absolutely loves that he can take care of like everything himself. He doesn't have to like send it off to internal medicine or GI or pediatrics or something. Like, he just gets to do it himself. He's hands-on, he's in there, he's figuring out the medications. So it's just really interesting to me. But then I see it a lot in his personal life with just the role that he takes with his siblings. He's got 4 siblings. So I see it in relationships because he does actually lead with a relationship. So over the years, sometimes taking responsibility for more than he needs to. So
more than
those are
he
just my
needs to
thoughts.
in terms of maintaining the relationship, or
taking care of other people when they're struck. Like, he's a caretaker, kind of like his siblings will call him if there's conflict. He's like the peacemaker guy.
got it. Okay. And so
He's kind of the one they all turn to.
now, is he high harmony as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we can see some of those relationship skills and just owning, mending the relationships, maybe psychological ownership of making sure that the relationships amongst his siblings are copacetic.
Yes. He
Okay.
loves that word. Yes.
And he loves that word, high harmony. There you go. Awesome. Janae, thank you so much. Gina.
Yeah, hey, yeah, I would kind of like take that clay and stick it right in front of the control center so I can do both at one time. I can see everything and have my hands in it. So, because I could tell my mom was the same way. So I probably get this from her or something, because we always were doing so many things, or hosting so many things, or being part of so many things. And while some people don't volunteer, or want to help, or maybe they're waiting to be asked, but you're so busy doing it all because you're going to make it happen. And that's the same way that I've been too. Now I'm learning to do a little bit better, but then that's when people start coming to you, right? Because they know you can do it. They know. And then like a little image I get, which is kind of like the control center, is like an Excel document, the technology of today. I have a list for my husband. I have a list for my son, my other son, everything everybody needs to do and take care of, whether it's for college or school or for their health or whatever. It's just to make sure it gets taken care of, and being on top of everything. But just like Janae was sharing, I'm the person that people will reach out to and they will come to me. I'm having to learn how to say no to certain things and learn how to step back because that caretaker, going into that caretaker role, a lot of times it's being so responsible and being in control of everything else and everybody else that I'm the one that falls a little short for myself. And but it's funny because even with the clay, I can feel it that my degree, my college was in ceramics. I can really get my hands in it, like so much. Maybe that's why I get peace from it in that way, is actually feeling the clay. So it's kind of interesting, a little play on words there.
That's super interesting that you see a little bit of the hereditary in the strength. So it makes me think nature, nurture, both
Right.
perhaps that are in there. But you brought up you become that go-to person, right, in the group. And I remember Simon Hurry talking about this, where there's a dangerous combination if you're high learner and then high responsibility, because the learner, and that's me, I'm number 1 learner, I'm number 5 responsibility. And I've experienced this before. You can learn what needs to be done very quickly, and you can very quickly develop an expertise that is maybe not excellent, but above average. So you're still the best person in the group to be able to complete that task. And then maybe it's a task that you actually don't enjoy doing. It doesn't really feed your soul, or it's not necessarily your zone of grace, so to speak. And then there's some conflict, because it's like, no, my responsibility wants to hold on to that task because I know I'm the best person on the team for it, and all the justification starts to go there. But this is where responsibility, and I started to experience this, my responsibility in overdrive here was starting to actually hold the team back, because there were people that could do the task more excellently than I, and there were other things that I could do more excellently than what I was doing. Okay. And so there's kind of the opportunity cost to consider there for the person that's high responsibility. Is this taking, yes, I feel a psychological ownership of this. Yes, I might be the best person and have all this evidence why I'm the best person to be able to do this on the team, and it'd be easier, yada, 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 all the things that we tell ourselves with high responsibility. But is it an opportunity cost where it's pulling me out of an area of greater giftedness, right? And so I can make a greater contribution over here. And yes, it's going to be some investment to get somebody else trained up in that particular task, but ultimately it's going to be a better product at the end. And I'm going to be feeling less resentment, because that was certainly coming up in my life. It's like, oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm the best guy to do it. Yep. Okay. And I'll just take it on. No questions asked. So yeah, that was, I know, part of my virtue journey in this area of responsibility, this theme of responsibility. Sean, I see your hand up here. And Gina, I see you nodding along. I appreciate that.
Hi, yes. I have to say I had a little question about the man in the green basketball outfit.
The ball hog?
Yeah, I didn't understand that. That one I'm like, what? I thought he was inspired to get fit. That was his responsibility. It was such a mess, his responsibility. You know what I mean? What drives him? Well, if you're out of shape, what will drive you is your responsibility to take good care of yourself. I was trying to go with that, but I didn't get it. One thing I would think of is a clipboard or a to-do list, or always double checking. I'm number 6 in responsibility. And so I realized, and I was reading a little bit about it, and it was like, yeah, I can see that where you take on. And I think the word that they have is the psychological connection. Yes. And so that has been both positive and negative. And I know we'll get to more in that later, but I would add to the word picture the time, or the checklist, or always a to-do list, and staying on task. And then I think what you said too, Matt, was really struck home with me. And that is coming to a place where we realize, even though we feel the responsibility of something, a project, event, whatever, to also recognize other people may have a better skill set to do the thing, even though we still feel the responsibility for it.
Yes.
And that was brilliant, the way you put that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yes, there's a lot of mindset work that we can do, and this is where the journal comes in that we have at Metanoia Catholic, where you can really capture, like, okay, is this a responsibility that we're clinging to out of fear? Perhaps if that's the case, that's not really a great motive. And there were certainly times in my life where I recognized it was a fear-based clinging to something, clinging to control. And that is certainly going to frustrate a growth in holiness, which is the path is you must increase, I must decrease, Lord. Right. And so we're surrendering more control. Okay. Yeah. The ball hog there, this actually resonate like one of my achievement stories, I guess you could say, or something that like a story that I love to tell. I remember when I was in high school, I was a freshman playing on the hockey team, and we were just like, the team was just in a funk, I remember. And I remember my coach just walking over to me, and I was a defenseman, walking over to me and just saying, "Hey, Matt, I want you to go out there. I want you to take the puck. You're not allowed to pass it to anybody. I want you to skate down the ice, and I want you to score." And it was like, that was responsibility engaged. That was feeding my M code of like, make an impact and be central. Like, there was such fuel that came out of that like comment that it's like, okay. And like permission, right? The affirmation of others too was something. And I went out there and I took the puck, I skated down the ice, and I shot from the blue line and I scored a goal. And it was like just such a moment where I was just like, and I got back to the bench and but like my responsibility was so entertained by that, of somebody like entrusting me to get the job done. I loved that. I love being able to own it and having somebody to trust me and see me as dependable. But again, we start to dip into this area where like other people's perceptions can really drive how we look at ourselves with responsibility. And so this is, again, where the thought work comes in. Why are we owning this? And oftentimes I found myself owning tasks because I have this need, arguably it's a vainglorious need, to be seen as the good guy, the dependable guy. Now, there is something virtuous in that. It's a good thing to desire. But when it's out of place, right? When it doesn't have its proper order of things, when I'm doing it and ignoring God's will for my life, or even seeking good counsel, or ignoring something else to feed my ego over here, definitely we can see that's crossing over into the vicious area. Gina, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I was thinking about it, and I could have like a list of many, like, of the negative qualities because of it, like, that you're kind of mentioning some later. But then I realized with my son, I have a son that has autism, that responsibility, of course, being a mother's going to kick in there and everything that we need to do. But I realized me, along with some other parents, had this responsibility for our community and other families, where we started putting, having, the meetings for us to connect and to learn from each other. Cause this is like, prior even to like social media world, like, and all that, that ways of connecting. And that was a good way, in our area, that, and it even led to us doing a nonprofit in the past and stuff like that. So it was a responsibility because, when somebody else is in your shoes, you get it, you understand it, to that part to where it led to a good thing. And there was a decision to let go at one stage. And that was really, really hard to say, okay, it's not my baby anymore. It can grow without me, right? And actually make that decision for many of the parents that were involved in everything. But I never thought about it through like this kind of a lens before. So that was really, I don't know, it was just really interesting listening. And I am learner too, as an 8. So I related to all of that that you shared.
Yes. Gina, what are some of your other adjacent themes? Like, what are your top 5?
Restorative is number 1, individualization, input, responsibility, and then context would be the top 5.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I can certainly hear the individualization showing up there, and definitely the responsibility as well. Cool. All right, Gina, thank you. All right, team, let's jump over to just a discussion here. Okay, so we've framed out responsibility. What's the motivation? Where do they seek to end? that word ownership, I think, is important. So I have here owning completion. Person that's high responsibility wants to own completion, right? So this is like where they want to rest. This is the good that they perceive. So when we talk about motivations for strengths, it's the focus is a particular good. When we talk M code, which we're starting to talk about and bring into our discussions a little bit more at Metanoia Catholic, it's more like the modality of how you are motivated, right? So I shared that I was motivated by being key or making an impact. Those are things that show up consistently. But like it's being key in owning completion, being making an impact and owning completion. Like the goal that I still wanted was to own completion of the project here as well, or fulfill a vision. But here for y'all, owning completion, how does this land in terms of responsibility? Might be going on because Gallup talks about psychological ownership of a task. But I do want to keep in mind that it's not just psychological ownership of a concept, it's actually getting something done. Still that executor talent. Jane, you got a hand up.
Yeah. So responsibility is 18 for me. So I've just always been taught that like those middle strengths are kind of like, they're like, you can take it or leave it. My husband has not done his strengths test yet, but I can see how responsibility is very, very high for him. And that's that ownership of completion. And sometimes it does get distorted. And it's one of those conversations we are having perpetually as our children get older. My son, my husband texts my son. I have a son that like maybe does one word texts. And we found out that he decided to quit his job. And so my husband, like, of obviously like over responsibility, he's, like, I think we need to send him some money, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just sitting here like, he's 27 years old. He's going to figure it out. He can do it, and I did. I just said, well, yeah, it is kind of scary when you cut something off and you don't have a safe place to land.
Yikes.
But I think I can think he can do it. But it was interesting to observe my husband's reactions. And it's one of those things, again, we where the harm, I think, the distorted responsibility of this virtue, this vicious virtue of taking too much responsibility, especially when we raise our children, is that my husband has a tendency to he wants to do everything for my children rather than allowing them to grow and make mistakes on their own. And, and of course, and it's a fine line as a parent, we want to provide for our children. And yet we also, at least my desire is to allow my children to become independent and acknowledge they're going to make mistakes. It's the only way to grow. So I find it very interesting that I have learned just to step back when responsibility goes into overdrive, that's how I say it. I just learned to step back because he has this need of completion, this owningness. So I can see it in him. Not so much me. I'm like, whatever. Responsibility.
Yeah. Well, locus of control, that lesson that we teach is a really important lesson for responsibility, right? Because if you're going to be taking responsibility for something, the presumption is that you have the authority to do so. And so that's where it can go vicious very quickly. If you seize authority over something that is not yours, or you don't have that authority over, you can show up very tyrannical or fall into a sin of usurpation, right? You're usurping authority that is not yours. Go, Shauna, Janae. Jenny, I see you're at number 5. Your hand's not up, and I know you got a kid with you right now, but I'd love to hear from you as well and your thoughts on this. Janae.
Yeah, real quick. This just seems so fitting for Chris. He has 6 responsibility, has belief at 5, and then his top 4 are relationship and strategic thinking. but it's like what he absolutely loves about what he does at work. But then it's also what drives him kind of crazy at home, because I will often begin many things and then leave them not completed. And so he was just making a comment the other day how we need to go through each room this week and figure out what needs to be done to complete the room, like what things we've talked about doing that we haven't done. So it just seems very fitting for somebody that's really high in responsibility.
Yes. And if you're high responsibility, high restorative, watch out. I mean, like, if you got a problem, I'll solve it is very much how you show up. And I know that I'm high restorative. It's my number 7, high responsibility here as well. And so, and we got 2 people on our team that are high responsibility, high restorative. So like, you give them a problem and sometimes they're in the middle of the meeting and you just see them start typing away at the computer. And it's like, no, not now. Don't solve it right now. Like, it's just so impulsive to get involved in solving that problem in that moment. And speaking of problems, Sean, I said you were going to go before Janae, and then I said, Janae, go ahead and speak. So Sean, you've got the mic.
Okay, thanks. And I love, Janae, what you just said too, because it made me, I thought of a situation years ago. I had a job and I was the only staff person working for a businessman, and he would give me tasks to do or say, this is what we're going to do. And then he would change them. But I would be on task and maybe be working on something for 2 or 3 days. And then he'd come in and go, hey, I want you to do whatever. And I'm like, okay, well.
He was high ideation.
Yeah. And I'm like having this timeline, and I'm responsible for whatever it is I'm doing. And I started a spiral notebook, and I would put in the date and time when he told me to do a thing. And then when he goes, I'd like you to do this by noon. And I go, okay, well, you wanted me to do this other thing by noon. Which is your preference? Because I started finding myself, and one of the things you mentioned, and I saw in the notes, is the psychological connection. Even though I didn't really care about the thing, I was going to do both of them. Mm-hmm. But it was like the psychological aspect became strong, and like, no, I said I was going to get this done by noon on Tuesday. And yeah, it just, I never, I mean, this has really brought a lot of insight in. But that psychological ownership, even though I didn't really, I mean, it was his business. So, but my responsibility to do the task. And so when he came in and did the switch, which he did a lot, and it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. You, when you said psychological ownership, it's like a little marriage that happens between that task. And even if the boss comes in and says, hey, we're just going to mothball this thing and we're not going to, like, it's a bit of a painful rupture that you can experience, because you have kind of poured yourself into this and you owned it. Well, and so that spirit of detachment here is certainly something that's helpful.
Yeah. And I think also some other people, and I don't know what his strengths were, but that had competing first things. Let's do 2 first things. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you don't have 2 first things. You have 1 or 2, but or you weave them. But anyway, that is really that's been very insightful. And I'm really low in restorative. So restorative is my 34. So I was resonating with what you and Janae just spoke about. So I think ClftonStrengths stuff is just fascinating. Thanks,
Fearfully
Matt.
and wonderfully made. We all are fearfully and wonderfully made, fashion in the deep. Okay, let's jump into our conversation. We pivot here midstream when we start talking about scripture to segue our dialogue into the virtuous and vicious ways. We already started hitting on that. So scripture poll today was from Living in Your Strengths, Catholic edition, the book, Matthew 7, verse 21. All right, so here's this. We look at this and we reflect a little bit, do a little mini lectio on this call to say, okay, Lord, through the scripture, how are you calling us to live virtuously in this talent? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Okay, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Okay, that's Matthew 7, verse 21. So as we look at this and we reflect on this, how does this start to inform the way that responsibility works? Okay. One of the first thoughts I hear is responsibility, that's psychological ownership. In order for it to show up virtuously, must be obedience to the Father's will. Right? The person that just says, Lord, Lord, paying lip service, but ultimately doesn't actually do what the Lord, Lord asks. Yeah, it's not really, it's a half-hearted profession of faith at that point. Right? Still following his or her own way. Jane, I see you got a hand up.
So our whole Holy Spirit must have been talking, because obedience also, that was the word that came up for me as well.
Obedience. Yeah.
And actually just kind of almost the opposite, in that doing the will of my Father, being very specific, like you mentioned. Responsibility has a tendency to take on more than they need to, right?
Mhm.
And so really being able to understand our unique call to sanctity, which is that beautiful workshop that Metanoia Catholic has, so that they can understand what part of the vineyard they are called to grow, and no more, no less. Obedience is like, the solid line and the dotted line of the road. You don't go over the solid line, you don't go over the dotted line, you stay in your lane. But when you do stay in your lane, how glorious is that, and how much more fruit you can produce for the Lord when that happens. So that was the things that came up for me as responsibility. And yeah, I feel for y'all. Like I said, it's only 18 for me, so it's a come or go theme. I can take it or leave it. But those of you who have responsibility high, I can see it could be a real cross. And discerning what is my responsibility, what am I taking too much, and what am I not doing that I'm called to do. So it's a very fine line. Going back to the will of my Father. What is the will of my Father? Obedience.
Yes. It's a cross, but it's also, I think it's really well said, Jane. It's a cross, but it's also our work to do, right? Every single one, like your woo is high for you, Jane. So but your woo's got its different vicious tendencies as well. And so that's something we all have our work to do here. One of the things that you said was when we follow the Lord's will, we can, or when we're not following the Lord's will, we can often kind of a responsibility can go into justification mode, where it's look at my works, look at everything I'm doing. And it's never really enough. We always just got to be taking on more and more and more. And that's the burden of self-justification. But the scripture that came to mind as you were sharing was, learn from me, for I'm meek and humble of heart. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And so, yes, it's good to be tired at the end of the day, but tired is different from being exhausted or spent to the point where it's starting to become a near occasion of sin. And I've certainly felt that arena where my responsibility overdrive has led to me being neglectful of other areas of my vocation, specifically to my wife or to taking care of my daughter, usually in the home, for the sake of business or accolades or whatever other, thing I was seeking after. Gina, you got a hand up here.
Yeah, that was really beautifully said, what y'all were just talking about, because I think it's been where God's calling me so much is the surrender novena. About, like, I don't know how many years ago I discovered that, has been such a gift because it is like directly speaking to my responsibility about, what to let go and what's not my responsibility, what's really his, and where he's calling me maybe to be more trusting instead of, and learning in what you were just saying, learning, and this has really only been over the last maybe 3 years or so, honestly, having this growth here, is instead of that doing, learning that it's that being with him. And in that being with him, right, I get to see what is that calling on my heart. Because I do feel, and I never really thought about it this way until this call, is that there is a responsibility to answer, right? Like there is this, yes for me to say. I feel that responsibility of saying yes to God, but I do understand, and I'm learning more and more, that it is about that discernment of what is from him, that I'm not saying yes to the wrong things. I'm not saying yes to the wrong voice. That I am truly, being with him and saying yes to what he is calling me to do. And that, and with my boys, being that I have a 17, a 19, and a 21-year-old, really discerning that detachment and when they need me and when they don't. And so yeah, so that's been a lot of growing the last couple of years, and y'all have been extremely helpful. So thank you.
Well, praise the Lord, Gina, on that. Yeah, that word surrender, that resonates with me as well. And so there's often times in my journaling exercises where I get to my exercise 6, my repents and my renouncing, right? Where it's ungodly self-reliance is showing up there a lot, right? Like grasping at control, that's showing up a lot. And that surrender, being able to discern really what is mine and what has God gifted me to be able to respond to, and taking responsibility for that. So it's not just abandonment or, that we're just acquiescing or anything like that. But it's just, there's a surrender to those things that aren't necessarily within our locus of control, and just accepting that is the Lord's will, right? His perfect will. Jenny, I see you got a hand up here as well at number 5. How's this hit you?
Hi. So I thought this is my responsibility kicking in, because I feel an obligation to to provide some input because I'm a number 5. But I guess I'm kind of new to the ClftonStrengths, and I haven't really had a chance to do much with it. But 2 of my other strengths are in relationship. So when you were describing responsibility, I was like, well, I'm not really the most dependable person, or so my choleric husband will remind me of. But I think it's like you say, I will get it. If you tell me what to do in a general way, I will get it done the way I think is best to get it done. But you will have to be more specific if you want me to get it done in a certain way. But I will, but at the end of the day, there's a bit of a people pleaser, which I'm sure we'll get into. And I thought before I took my ClftonStrengths that I would be really high in belief. I thought that was going to be my really high one. So I was kind of, or at least within the executing domain, I thought belief was going to be one of the higher ones for me, and instead it was responsibility. And I wasn't like super surprised, but I did think, maybe I'm confusing belief and responsibility. And I think another word for responsibility, or a good word to put into that category, would be integrity. I think people with responsibility really want to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. They don't want to just and then as you were talking, I was trying to look up this quote by G.K. Chesterton. I have a feeling he was really high in responsibility. And one of the quotes is, he used to write letters to people he would debate with. And this one is really funny, and I just love it. And it just hits me as super high responsibility. Is he responds to somebody who's writing this letter about what's wrong with the world today. And somebody asks him in this letter, G.K. Chesterton, what's wrong with the world today? And he responds, Dear sir, regarding your article, what's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world today? Dear sir, I am yours, G.K. Chesterton. And I just, that won't always hit everybody the right way, especially in our talking about locus of control. That can like sound like alarm bells going off against that. But if you're high in responsibility, you will get that. You will like see, you'll just see that as true. So
Yeah,
those are
high
kind of my
responsibility,
musings.
high responsibility, perhaps even high restorative that's there. I heard another nuance to that story where, and I don't know if this is true, but like, what is the problem with the world and what's the solution? And it was, dear sirs, I am. And so you had like this triple meaning where like, I am the problem, and then I am the solution, but the I am, Yahweh, is also solution that's in there as well. So yeah,
Another quote
go ahead.
is that one quote, and I forget who it was, and he said, evil happens in the world when good men do nothing. So
Edmund
that's
Burke,
another
yeah.
quote that makes me think of high responsibility.
Yes. Yeah. The only thing that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Sir Edmund Burke. Awesome. Yeah.
There you go.
Jenny, you shared about integrity. And certainly that's one of those themes, one of those words that's often associated with that high belief. And still, and you can see this where the dependability, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. That's where I think responsibility and integrity can really show up. And I remember one of my Marine colonels once saying that a really good definition of integrity is doing what you say you are going to do. And, here it's integrity very much in a doing sense. And so I think responsibility, that that resonates with me. Somebody telling me I'm out of integrity is I'm not particularly high in belief either. But that is, man, that's like one of the worst insults, if not the worst insult somebody could ever give to me.
Oh, absolutely. If somebody says you did something wrong, I'll say, okay, I'm sure you're right. But if somebody says you intended ill towards me or in this situation, I will flip a lid.
Triggered.
Say that about me.
Hashtag triggered. Awesome. Jenny,
Yeah.
thanks so much. Marianne,
you.
I see you got a hand up, and then we'll jump into our virtuous vices. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, just real quick. I wasn't going to talk, but I'm glad I logged on to this call. I'm number 6 in responsibility, number 3 learner. I had been doing one of the ministries I had been doing, volunteer ministries, was I did it for 8 years, and I finally just resigned a couple of weeks ago. And I felt guilty about leaving it. And I'm thinking, it's not that burdensome. Why couldn't I do it? But I never liked doing it. And I could never figure out why I didn't like doing it. There was no completion. And I know in my jobs, I've always seen where I liked jobs where I had a sense of completion, and I didn't do well in ones where I didn't. But I never applied it to volunteer work or ministries. And while everyone's talking, I'm thinking, oh, that's why that's why I've never liked it for 8 years. And yet I took on so much responsibility. I took on the leadership of the team. When people didn't come back during the pandemic, the people that had been on the team, I took over doing their work. I gave it over once. It wasn't done well enough. I took it back. And the whole time, I didn't want to be doing it.
Yes.
And that's it. Responsibility going awry, I guess.
It is. And I was, as soon as you said I was in this ministry for 8 years, and I'm just thinking to myself, and you've hated it for 6. Like you've been wanting to get out for 6 of it, but like it's very easy to get stuck. I think this is something also for all of us as leaders. If we have people on our team that are high responsibility, we really have, I'd say, a duty in caring for them and doing a periodic check-in. because people aren't giving you their best work when they're miserable. Right. If they're doing work and they're holding on to it because it's responsibility or whatever it is, like it's not the right motivations. You're not getting the best that you could for that particular task. And so this is something that I build into my conversations with my team is we kind of review the work that they're doing. And then we ask them about, I initiate those questions about, is this fulfilling? Are you feeling motivated with this? Or are they having to psych themselves up to do the work? Or is there fruits of resentment that are there? Whether the task is getting done or not is irrelevant if the people are becoming more vicious in the process. The work is no longer serving the Lord at that point, and therefore it's no longer going to be fruitful.
Right. And the responsibility, overusing it for me always leads to depletion and resentment. Question and resentment. Yeah.
I think we can all take a note on that. Marianne, I'm so happy you jumped on and shared that bit for our call here. Okay, let's wrap up here with our virtuous and vicious side. So again, virtuous side, we look at interdependence because these themes are all about working together in the body of Christ. And so we'll talk about them as in their interaction with other people in relationship, right? It's how we live them out. So we can live them out in ways that lead to interdependence. That's a virtuous way, or ways that lead to independence, dependence, or codependence. That's the vicious way. So what's the person living for responsibility interdependently doing? It says yes to projects that they can honestly fulfill, and no to those that it cannot. So that's one way I'd say. Says yes to the projects it can honestly fulfill and no to those that it cannot. In order to be able to do that, you have to have a clear sense of the authority structure, what the expectations are. I find that I'm very hesitant now to say yes to something that is open-ended without clear scope to that project. Because once I say yes, I'm in. And if all of a sudden we get scope creep and that thing was like this big and suddenly it's like it's grown to be this big, it's all mine still. Like I already said yes to it. Okay, but I haven't defined the parameters. So that person that is guarding their yes, knowing they feel perhaps inclined to say it, so that they can show up in a way that is virtuous and not going to be leading to resentment, not going to be leading to burnouts or overdrive or holding the team back, right? By saying, yeah, I'm going to say yes to something that I can only give you a C+ worth of energy on. Well, I don't know if, unless the standard is C+, I don't know if that's going to be overall helpful for the team, even if they have suddenly found the person that's going to fill that slot on the team. Okay. So there's a lot of self-reflection that's required of responsibility, self-reflection on your gifts, self-reflection on what motivates you, being attentive to your time, the resources that you have available, also that you can steward that yes or that no in a virtuous way. All right, that leads to that interdependence on the team. All right, what the scope, refining the scope does as well is I will often, people will ask me now, like, hey, you want to be part of this? And I'll say, well, I'll say yes to this, but no to this over here. So I start to not necessarily say, you dictate what I'm saying yes to. I'll always own what I'm saying yes to. And then I'm going to say no to the things that are just, they're not going to be, I'm not going to be a better fit. Okay. We say yes to things that you can 10X and no to those things that somebody else is meant to 10X. All right. That's kind of the mantra here. Yes to those things that you can 10X, no to those things that somebody else is meant to 10X. All right. The independence. Say yes in a self-serving capacity, right? I've lived here before. I say yes because I want to be the guy that gets things done. But then I also go head down and I don't communicate with people on the team. I remember when we were doing our first virtual Catholic conference, and this thing was like, we had no idea how big this thing was going to go, but it got big and I was still working a full-time job. And I remember the point where it was 3 days before launch. We still hadn't built out the conference itself. And there were, at this point, there was about 35,000 people that had registered for it. Ultimately, there were 64,000 people that registered for it, with 64 like frontline speakers like Father Mike Schmitz and Christopher West and Sister Miriam James Highland and Father Larry Richards and all these like headliners that were entrusting themselves and their work to us to deliver to the masses here. And I am still working my 9 to 5 and holding on to the tasks. And I remember Aaron pulling me aside and said, Matt, you're going to make yourself the single point of failure if you keep trying to make yourself the single point of success with this. And so finally I just turned over and the team together. And it was so much better when the team did it together. It really brought us together. So example of going independence. Dependent is when we need others' affirmation for getting things done, for a positive self-worth, right? For a positive perception of our self-worth or self-esteem. Leads to codependence, says yes begrudgingly and holds the team in mediocrity. Okay, I've been there before, right? While the team takes advantage, enjoys the free ride. All right, so that's when you're saying yes because you want to be that people pleaser. But meanwhile, you're just resenting them, and you're saying yes to things that you're not going to 10x. They're not in your wheelhouse. You can get it done. Maybe if you're a high learner, you can get it done in an adequate fashion, but like you're selling your soul in the process, and it's causing more harm. But meanwhile, everybody else is just like, it's done. And don't worry, Marianne, she's got it. She's been going on 8 years, and she's obviously loving it because she's still here. Okay. How's this landing, folks? How are these? Anybody got some stories that they can contribute on the virtuous side versus the vicious side? Let's get it out there. Or we just go with my examples here. Gina, you got to have some. Gina.
Yeah. Well, now that you say all that about the resentment stuff, I can recognize it in so many situations. Holy moly. Yeah, I don't know how to, I'm not sure if my husband wants to do our taxes though, but like I'm good at all that kind of stuff, but I don't want to do it. And then I do build up this resentment and everything that I'm the one that has to do it versus being able to hand it over, when I think he actually has that talent of like numbers and things like that. But I need to go look up his ClftonStrengths and
I want to be clear here, like just because we don't like the task doesn't mean we say no to it, right? There's certainly going to be things that are obligations that come our way that we say yes to, but let's make it an intentional choice, right? Because when the resentment comes when we are operating from I have to versus I'm choosing to.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to choose to have our taxes done and have things complete and be on top of our finances and all of that. So I guess I need to like redo it in my head. I just, and maybe it's because I have too many yeses and responsibilities in other places that I'm feeling less time to do it too and everything.
Yeah, maybe.
But I could see in the past, like I said, all the yeses that I used to say, and now I am learning to slow down because I went to this. I'm on the commission at the Archdiocese for persons with disabilities. My first meeting there, somebody needed to volunteer for something. Nobody raised their hand. I'm the new person. I'm like, well, okay, I can help with that.
Restorative.
Sure.
Restorative responsibility.
Now I'm responsible for this whole thing. It gets twisted and it turns a little bit in a different direction because more people get involved, which is wonderful. I was so happy to have help. But then when it goes to submit it to the person it has to be submitted to, oh no, you can't do it like that. And I'm like, oh, and it's not my I'm not a techie person to be able to like do a website and all this stuff. And I could figure it out if you let me be in charge of it. But if I'm not the one in charge of it and I have to turn it over to you, that's what happened. Well, now it needs to be reorganized so it can be user friendly. And now it's kind of building up to be it's this responsibility that I feel like I have now. And I never thought about actually saying, I don't want to have this responsibility. I liked when you said yes to this, but not to this. I didn't know what I was saying yes to at all. And here we are at least 3 years later, and I'm still working on this job. And I like that. I need to go like clarify this job and see who wants to be in charge of this and hand it over. I don't have a problem surrender. I have a little bit of a problem surrendering it. It's very hard to give it over, not having it be complete or be the right way.
Yes,
And
this sounds like a great thing to get coached on at one of our group coaching calls, Gina. Right? It's just like,
that's
what
what
are you
happened.
making
It was
that
a
mean?
yes.
Turning this project over. Yes.
Oh, so yeah, but I think it's about time now, because it's getting in the way of other things, and it's not letting me show up. And then I'm like, well, maybe I said yes to this commission and maybe I shouldn't be on it, but it's all because of that one particular job. The other stuff I love.
It's almost like an annulment process for getting married, right? You wed yourself to something and you didn't really have proper knowledge here of what you were saying yes to, right? And so maybe there's like an annulment process for this project that you've jumped into, and you've taken it to a certain point, but it's just kind of like it's a discussion, right? And this is, you can always, even if you say yes, it stings people with high responsibility. The stings, all right.
Yeah.
Even when you say yes, you can always go and refine, right? You can always go and refine. And it just happens in the form of a conversation. And the conversation is really about what's good for the project overall. It's not just taking you off the hot seat, though that's like part of it as well. But it's like, I really don't think I'm the best person to keep this going forward. And this is where I can help. And this is where I didn't ask the right questions. We got to ask good questions up front, responsibility, right? We got to get the parameters as best we can around these things. I see a couple of hands up here. Sean, Jane, and then Jen.
Yeah, a couple of things, and that was the words integrity. That really touched me because it's so very important to be in integrity. But it also led me to think about being responsible in dignity, and the dignity of I'm a child of God. One of the things that you guys talked about earlier was obedience. Well, and that was like when my situation earlier, when I had an employer that would change the to-do list to meet his schedule. I understood what he was, it was to suit him, and I was there to work for him. And I had to do internal adjustment to say, my dignity as a child of God is first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will do what you're asking me. In my mind, I'm saying this in an honorable, loving way, even though instead of I started feeling resentful because I started feeling like a tool. You know what I mean? He could just move me here, move me there. And I realized I don't want to be a doormat. And so I think that's where we can start feeling that, when in fact, what we need to do is step back. For me, I had to step into, wait a minute, my dignity comes from child of God. And so, yeah, okay, I'll do this thing, but I won't lose my dignity in the process. I don't know if that makes sense, but
well, I hear like kind of there being some people pleasing that's going on. The people pleasing, we have a fun expression that we got from the life coach school. People pleasers are liars, right? Because they're ultimately they're saying yes to things, but they really internally they're not saying yes to those things. But it's more they want to have that perception. There's something that they're gaining, and if you're grounded, like you said, in your identity. In something that truly is absolute and unchanging, and your identity as a beloved daughter of God, right? Which is a journey to get to that place. We can see where that can help us to stand confidently and have our yes mean yes and our no mean no, because everything else comes from the evil one, as scriptures say. Jen, I see your hand up. We're going to have you go first, and then Jane, you can close us out. I also threw up on the screen here some of those virtuous mindsets. We'll get to those in a second. Go ahead, Jen.
Hi, I think this follows pretty well with what Sean was just saying. And if you went to the last screen, I was just reading them and I'm like, I do all of those things on the vicious side. I do it because I love the positive. What is it? Oh yeah, I say yes because I know that I'm gonna feel bad if the job doesn't get done. I say yes because I get praised for it from other people, or I say yes because I say yes, but then I'm like scrubbing the dishes in anger. And it's just really hard for me to like look at those and be like, oh, I relate to all those three, but I barely relate to the virtuous side. And I think when I look at the difference, I think the difference is when I'm doing all of those three, I'm still like just looking at myself, and I'm not looking at the project or the relationship as a bigger picture than just me. And like, I think maybe it was Gina who was talking about, or somebody was talking about earlier, the abandonment prayer.
Yeah,
That's
surrender
just,
prayer. Yeah.
the surrender prayer is just really like, I can be a part of the picture, but I am not the picture.
Wow. Jenny, praise the Lord. That's like really, thank you for sharing that. Super insightful there. Yeah. I mean, but here's the thing too, like the hope, just by, we'll jump over here into like these questions. Some of these questions here on the virtuous mindset side, that they can really jumpstart us into that virtuous living out of the strength. Okay. So, or of the talent here. So is it the best service to others, my primary obligations, and myself to say yes to this? Okay. So it's like, we're looking at things and there is an order of priority here. Like I remember a priest telling me that, like, what are the things that you've made a vow to? Your wife, your kids? Like, there's an order of priority here. So we have to consider our state in life and where, if we say yes to this project, are we going to be compromising, our, ability, or yes to our employer, or a yes to our spouse, or a yes to our kids. Okay. Or even our personal health. Now there are times where we will put our personal health to this at the kind of lower on the order of priorities than somebody else's spiritual health. All right, but then there's a balance. There's a service there, because somebody else's spiritual health, which is we could argue is higher. I remember Father Chad Ripperger talking about this, than our personal health. But that doesn't mean we just neglect ourselves completely, because there's also a sin against charity there, right? We have to consider ourselves. But, we can certainly see St. John Vianney being in the confessional for, 18 straight hours. Arguably, there was a sacrifice of personal health there to tend to somebody else's spiritual health. Okay. But that's not like always, that is a discerning relationship. St. John Vianney is a saint, right? So he was very close to our Lord. And so this is about following the will of the Lord here. But we don't want to go to the extreme and be like, we're just going to, everything that we do is going to be self-flagellation, right? Is there a way to narrow the scope of my yes to something to which I can commit? I really like that question. All right. And I remember even coaching somebody on this, and, he was getting invited over to a parish council, and there was concern that the job was going to be too much scope. And I was like, well, what are the things that you definitely feel okay saying yes to? And what are those things that you definitely can say no to? This is a volunteer position. Just say yes to those things that you definitely can say yes to, and no to those things that you can say no to. Do you feel okay saying that? Yeah. Do you think that's in best service to the organization to say that? Yes. Okay. And it was very helpful. He was able to have a very good conversation with his pastor over that. Okay. The vicious mindsets. I'll do it myself. Yes, that's like my mantra. Was working on it here, folks. Work in progress. Work in progress. I did it myself. So again, look at me. I get to be the single point of success, and I can point, right? Just ignore where I was a single point of failure. Just look at the single point of success, please. And then just let him do it, right? And that's kind of more that codependent. We'll just let so-and-so take it. But there's no real discussion on the people that are on the receiving end of the work that so-and-so is doing. They're just like, okay, we're just assume that he or she is happy in it. They've been around here for 8 years. They couldn't possibly be resenting us quietly, you know? At the same time, just like, I love the thought, you know, I'm going to say yes to those things I can 10X and no to those things that somebody else is meant to 10X. Cool. All right, team. That's what we got. Any closing thoughts here as we wrap up? If not, thank you for all the contributions here. We had some high responsibility that's on the team, and there's always hope here with this. So I like sometimes, even if you're using our journal, I like taking my exercise 3 and using it as a time to present some of my gifts, some of my strengths here to the altar and invite the Lord to purify them as well. And, or even taking a strength through our journaling process, through our reason cycle, to be able to see where it might be showing up as self-serving on the vicious side of things, or in that interdependent way, and inviting the Lord to infuse that grace into us to live out more virtuously those strengths. So thanks for being with us. We are in the Metanoia Catholic Academy, all of us. So if you go to CatholicCoaching.com, look up the Metanoia Catholic Academy, that's where you'll find the group that's jumping on these strengths calls. So thank you so much for being with us, and share this resource with other people that are strengths nerds, fellow strengths nerds. I invite you to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel or to the podcast here. Write a review, please, so we can climb the charts, because there's not a whole lot of conversation around how do we live these out virtuously, all right? And until we have that virtuous conversation, we can be living out these strengths with the best of intentions, but they're not in kingdom building endeavors at that point, or focus on something that really is our greatest good, which is God alone. All right. Thanks for being with us. God bless. See you next time.